A car that a Bugatti-certified technician flew across the Atlantic Ocean to declare dead. A vehicle identification number locked by the manufacturer itself. A CEO who went on Instagram, personally, to explain why this rebuild simply could not be done. And then a British YouTuber and his dad pulled it apart with a rolling bin base from a workshop floor. We need to talk about what is happening with Matt Armstrong's Bugatti Chiron per Sport. Because what started as a rebuild story has quietly turned into something far bigger than a YouTube series. It has become a full-scale confrontation between a private builder and one of the most powerful automotive brands on the planet, and right now, against every reasonable prediction, the builder appears to be winning. This is where things stand. And some of it is genuinely shocking. To understand why this moment matters, you have to understand what the Chiron per Sport actually is. Bugatti produced only 60 of them. 60. Not 60,000. Not 600. 60 cars, total, built for the entire world. Each one priced between $4 and $4.5 million at launch, and designed around a philosophy that Bugatti describes internally as prioritizing agility and handling precision over raw straight-line performance, though with a quad-turbocharged W16 engine producing over 1,500 horsepower, the word only does a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. The carbon fiber monocoque, the single-piece structural tub that forms the spine of the entire vehicle, is not just a body panel. It is the car. Everything attaches to it. The suspension geometry, the drivetrain, the crash structures, all of it references that central tub. Which is why, when the car belonging to Miami-based content creator Alex Gonzalez met a barrier at speed, the damage assessment was never going to be straightforward. The insurer wrote it off. That outcome was not surprising. What followed was more interesting. Alex purchased the car back from salvage auction for approximately $1,900,000, a significant figure by almost any measure, but a meaningful discount from what an intact, road-legal Chiron per Sport commands. The financial logic of what came next was built entirely on that gap. If the car could be returned to drivable, road-legal condition, the numbers could work. If it could not, Alex had spent nearly $2 million on what would eventually become the world's most expensive static display piece. He called Matt Armstrong. And that phone call set off a sequence of events that none of the parties involved, not Alex, not Matt, not Bugatti, could have fully anticipated. Here is where the story stopped being a rebuild video and started being something else entirely. When it became clear that Alex intended to have the Chiron rebuilt independently rather than return to Bugatti's factory in Molsheim, France, Bugatti took a step that was almost certainly intended to end the conversation before it started. They locked the car's vehicle identification number in their internal systems. The practical consequence of that decision was total. No authorized Bugatti dealer anywhere on Earth, not in Europe, not in the United States, not anywhere, would sell replacement components for this specific vehicle. Headlights, trim panels, mechanical components, structural elements. Nothing was available through official channels. The car existed in a kind of authorized limbo, a Bugatti that Bugatti had decided, unilaterally, it would no longer support. Then Mate Rimac, the CEO of Bugatti, posted a video on Instagram addressing the situation directly. The tone of it was measured, and the concerns he raised were not entirely without merit. The crash had caused damage to the carbon monocoque and the gearbox housing. These were not cosmetic repairs. Rimac pointed to the safety implications of a structural failure in a vehicle capable of exceeding 200 miles per hour, and those implications are real. He clarified that some of the parts pricing figures being circulated online were inaccurate. And he left a door open. The factory in Molsheim, he said, would welcome the car if Alex decided to go the official route. What Bugatti's communications team almost certainly did not anticipate was the effect this public statement would have on the audience watching. When a CEO of a company making $4 million hypercars takes time out of his schedule to post a personal Instagram video about a YouTube rebuild channel, he is not projecting strength. He is revealing concern. And the automotive internet noticed that immediately. The VIN lock, the official statement, the parts blacklist, taken together, they did not look like a company exercising reasonable quality control. They looked like a company trying to suppress something it found threatening. Matt Armstrong had millions of subscribers before this project began. After Rimac's video, the numbers climbed in a way that made the situation considerably harder for Bugatti to manage from a distance. There is a single image from this build series that has probably traveled further than anything else associated with it, and it is worth spending a moment on why. Bugatti's CEO had stated, clearly and publicly, that separating the front and rear sections of a Chiron required specialized equipment available at only 2 facilities in the world. This was not an unreasonable claim on its face. The Chiron is a mid-engined car built around that carbon monocoque, and the engineering tolerances involved in keeping the two halves properly located relative to each other during separation are genuinely demanding. The wrong approach could cause damage that would make an already expensive situation dramatically worse. Matt Armstrong and his father separated the car using a 2-post workshop lift and the rolling base from a workshop bin. Materials that were already in the garage. Scrap, essentially. It worked. The front and rear halves of a 60-unit Bugatti Chiron Per Sport separated cleanly, without incident, without proprietary tooling, and without the involvement of either of the 2 authorized facilities on the planet supposedly capable of performing this operation. The reason this moment resonated so far beyond the existing subscriber base was not simply that it proved Bugatti's claim wrong. It was the visual. A car worth millions of dollars, resting on improvised supports cobbled together from workshop odds and ends, being gently separated by a man and his father in what looked like an ordinary garage. It was the most effective possible rebuttal to the idea that this car existed in some category beyond human comprehension, because there it was, comprehended, dismantled, and laid open on a concrete floor in Miami. What the split revealed was sobering. The crash impact had driven the engine forward with enough force to crush a coolant pipe and leave pressure marks in areas where you absolutely do not want to see pressure marks on any car, let alone a $2 million one. The gearbox housing had sustained damage. The cast aluminium mounting support, the structural component that locates the entire drivetrain within the vehicle, had fractured on both sides. But the engine block itself appeared intact. And that single fact changed the complexion of everything. With the car split open and the damage fully visible, the critical path became clear. The broken cast aluminium drivetrain mounting support was not a component you could order from anywhere. Bugatti was not selling to this project, and aftermarket alternatives for a component this specific simply do not exist. It had to be repaired, or the project ended there. Matt sent the component to a specialist machinist his team referred to simply as Bob, someone who had worked on previous Armstrong builds and whose track record they trusted. The first question Bob had to answer was not how to weld the part. It was whether the part could be welded at all. This is a point worth understanding properly. Cast aluminium alloys vary considerably in their weldability, and the determining factor is composition, specifically the magnesium content. High magnesium aluminium alloys resist TIG welding in ways that can make the process unreliable, and a weld that looks clean on the surface can fail under load without warning. There was a genuine period of uncertainty while Bob assessed the material, and the episode covering this moment was honest about that uncertainty in a way that made it genuinely tense to watch, even knowing at that point that the car had already started. The material confirmed weldable. Bob welded it. And then he reinforced the repair beyond the original factory specification, adding material in the areas of greatest weakness. This is where Matt raised a point that deserves more attention than it typically gets in the comments section discussions. There is a credible engineering argument that Bugatti designed this mounting support to be the deliberate weak point in the drivetrain assembly, what engineers refer to as a crumple or sacrificial component. The idea is that in a crash, you want the forces to travel somewhere specific, causing controlled, reparable damage rather than catastrophic failure of components that cannot be repaired or replaced. If the mount was designed to break first in order to protect the engine and gearbox, then making it significantly stronger than original shifts where the forces would go in a future impact. Matt acknowledged this openly. He did not have access to Bugatti's engineering documentation because Bugatti was not sharing it with him, and so he was making a judgment call in the absence of complete information. He said so. That kind of transparency about the limits of what you know is rarer than it should be in automotive content, and it is one of the reasons the project has attracted the level of serious engagement it has. While the mounting support was being repaired, a detail emerged that gave the internet something to celebrate. The starter motor on the Chiron Per Sport, a $4 million, 60-unit hypercar, shares a part number with a Volkswagen Group diesel application. Specifically, a 1.9 TDI unit found in ordinary family cars. Volkswagen's ownership of Bugatti has been publicly known for years, but seeing that ownership expressed in a specific searchable part number that anyone could look up was a different kind of proof, concrete, shareable, and slightly deflating to the mythology that surrounds the brand. The car started on the first attempt. Let that settle for a moment. A Bugatti Chiron Per Sport, one of 60 ever built, declared a total loss by a manufacturer-certified technician, locked out of the official parts supply chain, split in half in a workshop, and reassembled without access to a single piece of factory technical documentation, started on the first attempt. A minor fuel leak appeared almost immediately afterward, traced to a connection that had come loose during reassembly rather than any deeper failure. The team resolved it, restarted the car, and confirmed the next critical milestone. The gearbox selected a gear. The engine and transmission were communicating with each other as a functioning drivetrain for the first time since the crash. Custom exhaust work by Valvetronic had given the Chiron a deeper note than stock, not the dramatic transformation that aftermarket exhausts sometimes produce on more conventional cars, because Bugatti's W16 has never been celebrated primarily for its sound character, but a meaningful improvement over the standard setup. And then something happened on the business side of this story that nobody had predicted at the outset. Alex had publicly floated the possibility of manufacturing replacement components using three-dimensional printing technology, partly as a genuine contingency plan, partly as a negotiating signal to Bugatti. Whether it was that specific threat, the accumulated pressure of the audience watching, the fact that the car had now demonstrably started, or some combination of all of these, Mate Rimac reached out. The parts blacklist was lifted. Bugatti's quoted repair estimates came down from the original figures. The relationship between the workshop in Miami and the factory in Molsheim shifted from outright opposition to something that could be described, cautiously, as a standoff giving way to acknowledgement. Bugatti did not do this because they had a change of heart about the principles involved. They did it because the story had reached a scale where refusing to engage was no longer a viable position. Matt Armstrong's audience had become, in effect, a form of leverage that no corporate communications strategy was equipped to simply wait out. Starting is not finishing. Matt has said this himself, and it is worth taking seriously. The cooling system is the most significant outstanding concern. The Chiron was driven, not briefly, but for a meaningful distance, without coolant at some point before Matt acquired it. The consequences of running a high-performance engine without adequate coolant can range from relatively minor seal degradation to catastrophic internal damage, and the frustrating thing about this category of problem is that it does not always reveal itself in a workshop environment. A car idling for 2 minutes at ambient temperature tells you almost nothing about how the cooling circuit will behave when the engine is under full load on a road, generating real heat that has to go somewhere. The water pump seals are a specific concern. Damaged seals from a dry-running episode can sit quietly through workshop testing and announce themselves dramatically the moment the car is driven properly. This is not speculation. Matt himself referenced a previous project where exactly this sequence of events played out. The radiators at the front of the car still require attention, and they are physically located in the section of the vehicle that took the crash impact, which means the cooling system remediation and the front-end structural repairs are linked in a way that makes sequencing the remaining work more complex than it might appear from outside. The front structure itself remains unresolved. The rear of the car is alive. The engine runs. The gearbox selects gears. The front of the car still carries the damage from the original impact, and until that work is complete, the Chiron does not move on a public road regardless of how well everything else is functioning. Carbon fiber repair is its own category of challenge. Unlike metal fabrication, where material can be cut, shaped, welded, and reinforced by skilled hands with conventional tools. Carbon fiber panels and structural elements either retain their engineered integrity or they do not. The assessment of which category a given piece falls into requires equipment and expertise that goes beyond what a standard workshop offers. This is one area where the lifting of the parts blacklist matters in a practical sense. Official Bugatti components for the front end are now at least theoretically available in a way they were not for most of this project. And beyond all of the physical repairs lies the deeper question of long-term function. Getting a car started in a controlled environment is a milestone. Getting it to drive cleanly at road speeds, hold operating temperature across a full warm-up cycle, manage boost pressure without fault codes, shift through every gear ratio without hesitation, and behave consistently over time, that is the actual test of whether this rebuild has succeeded. The sensor calibration on the repaired mounting support, the gearbox pressure profiles, the electrical systems that were disconnected and reconnected without factory diagnostic access, these are unknowns that only real-world testing over real distance will answer. The right to repair debate has been active in consumer electronics for years, most visibly in the ongoing legal and regulatory battles around smartphone and device repair that have played out in courts and legislatures across the United States and Europe. The automotive equivalent of that debate has been slower to reach public consciousness, partly because cars are more complex, partly because the manufacturers involved have been more subtle in how they manage parts access and diagnostic information. What Matt Armstrong's Bugatti build has done is make that debate impossible to ignore, and it has done so not through legal arguments or policy papers, but through the most effective possible demonstration. A man actually doing the thing the manufacturer said could not be done, on camera, for millions of people to watch in real time. Bugatti's response, the VIN lock, the public statement, the parts blacklist, was an exercise of exactly the kind of manufacturer control that right-to-repair advocates have been arguing against in more mundane contexts. The fact that it was applied to a $4 million hypercar rather than a family saloon makes it more dramatic, but it does not make it categorically different. The underlying dynamic is the same. A manufacturer asserting that only it has the right to restore a product to function, regardless of what the owner wants to do with their property. The fact that the blacklist was eventually lifted does not resolve that question. It answers a specific negotiation. The question of what manufacturers owe independent builders, independent repair shops, and individual owners in terms of parts access and technical information remains open, and the Bugatti Chiron per Sport has become the most watched live demonstration of why that question matters. Whether Matt Armstrong gets this car road legal or not, that conversation has already changed because of this project. The audience that watched every episode of this series understands something about manufacturer control of the parts supply chain that they did not understand before. And that understanding is not going away. Here is where this stands right now. The car has started. The gearbox is selecting gears. The parts blacklist has been lifted. The CEO of Bugatti has moved from a firm public no to something that looks considerably more like cautious acknowledgement. And Matt